Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Future Affairs, our spotlight is on prioritising employment for the disabled. The latest DOSM data records for Malaysia over 805,000 Malaysians registered as persons with disabilities or OKU, which is roughly around 2.4% of our population. Yet, formal employment numbers barely register OKU employment. In the public sector alone, for example, the OKU workforce participation has remained stagnant at around 0.3%, well below the 1% target, which was set almost 4 decades ago. Now, this gap is an urgent economic indicator of the poverty and marginalization risk for disabled people in Malaysia. On a national economic scale, it's crucial to note that employers are warning of skills shortages as Malaysia pours resources into upskilling under budget 2026. In fact, 470 billion ringgit has been earmarked for upskilling and future-ready businesses, with OKU Malaysians willing to work, yet locked out of employment opportunities because systems are never designed with their realities in mind. Without recognized certification, talent remains invisible, even as the economy demands and pays for future-ready skills. Meanwhile, in a timely development, Malaysia's first hybrid train-the-trainer certification program designed by and for the OKU community, aligned with national standards under HRD Core, is now launched. Joining me in the studios for this discussion is the program founder himself, Amirul Safuan Haji Muhammad Ishaq, CEO of Ameer Safone Inclusivity Academy. Ameer, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Ameer, thank you very much for making time to join us live in the studios. But of course, I'd love to start off by framing the discussion around the fact that Malaysia has very long approached any sort of OKU participation via more of a welfare and assistance scheme sort of a lens.
Right.
So tell us also, drawing from your lived experiences as a spinal cord injury survivor, why it was really important for you to actually highlight the structural gap via the work that you're doing now.
Thank you so much, Tehmina. Particularly before I was, in the OKU category, I was in a banking and finance industry for almost two decades.
Right.
Right, focusing on developing sustainable investments, to the public, and also the Sharia ESG, landscape, right? So in 2020, when I involved in accident, right, I have injured my spinal cord, and I was diagnosed 86% of my physical function disabled. So from there, I lost the opportunity for me to work again, and I do experience the difficulty to enter back the industry. And prior to that, I make a very bold decision to move into entrepreneurial ventures. So prior to that, I started off my business in perfume and fragrances. So last year, I decided to expand the business into learning and development, focusing on OKU empowerment. So this is where the Ameer Safone Inclusivity Academy came into the picture. Prior to this, right, Malaysia's challenge has actually never been about motivational talent. From what I've seen, the real issue is access. When I talk about access, means that to recognize credentials, real career pathways, and professional networks that employers genuinely trust. For a long time, OKU participation has been framed, as you mentioned earlier, right, mainly through welfare and assistance. Particularly, we can say it's a charity-based. And while support do matters, that framing quietly lowers the expectation of the public towards the community.
Exactly.
Right? So we talk a lot about, ramps, elevators, parking spots, etc.
Workplace accessibility.
Exactly,
yeah.
which are important.
Sure.
However, we do not talk enough about, careers, progressions, or leadership for the OKUs. As a result, right, OKU are still often seen as recipients of help rather than contributors of value to the economy. The number tells a clear story. We are aware that Malaysia has introduced the 1% civil service employment policy for persons with disabilities back in 1988.
Exactly, that's
right?
like 37 years running.
Yeah, almost 40 years ago,
Correct.
right? Participation still hovering around 0.3%. The gap is not because OKU lack of ability. It's because many are channeled into basic non-career track roles. For example, like filing, clerical work, blue-collar workers, baristas. These are the common work that being offered to the OKU, instead of the role that would be able to build skills, responsibility, and long-term growth. That's not a talent problem. Basically, this is a design problems. What's interesting that the global data backs this up. Research using the LinkedIn workforce data across advanced economies shows that professionals with disabilities perform at similar levels to others. Yet progression by switching companies instead of moving up where they are in. In other words, the talent is there, the pathways are not. There is also visibility issues. About 16% people globally live in some form of disability back home in Malaysia. Only around 2% are formally registered. Yet national health data shows more than 11% of adults experience functional difficulties. That means the millions of Malaysians are active, capable, and working. However, statistically, they are invisible.
You're not counted, correct.
Exactly.
So Ameer, you have been actually very active in thinking around how actually OKU inclusivity can come from a training the trainer style certification,
Right.
which is what Amirul Safuan Inclusivity Academy has recently launched.
Yeah.
Tell us some more about the program in detail, how it's going, and what the reception has been so far from, let's say, the first cohort.
Yeah. Formal certification isn't only the factor actually, but it's a critical economic lever because in Malaysia we are credential-led labour market.
Very much so.
Right.
And the more credentials you have, the better your chances of climbing the corporate ladder.
Exactly. Employers don't just hire based on potential, right? So they rely on recognized standards to assess capability, to manage risk and justify decisions internally. When OKU skills sits outside that system, talents get treated as informal, regardless of how capable the individuals actually is. The best thing, right, to share with you the real example where I have experience in the last cohort of this HRD Corp funded Train the Trainer certification programs specifically for OKU because it's under their training market development, training market transformation pillars. We brought together participants from across Malaysia. Almost half of them, I was quite surprised, it's actually professionals, right?
So already a part of the formal economy in that sense.
They are ESG and sustainable specialists in global organizations. Some of them are lecturers, government officers, and some are entrepreneurs. And some of them is also holding master's degree and a few actually PhD holders, right? So over the 6 days of the training, what we saw is that we did not actually lower the standards or give any special treatment. What we saw is that the articulation, high engagement and adaptability among the participants, they're giving full commitments, and some of them even travel all the way from Penang to KL using ETS, on the train, on the wheelchair, in order for them to complete the program, to earn their certification. So that level of effort actually tells you everything that you need to know about motivation. One experience that stayed with me was a participant who visually impaired. We accepted his application.
Right.
What we did was redesign parts of the module to ensure that he would be able to access the program easily, not the standards, just the delivery. And Alhamdulillah, he completed the program successfully and was certified as a HRD Corp trainer alongside everyone else. So this experience changed the conversation completely. So once employers and institutions actually work with OKU professionals, the narrative shifts very quickly, where from can they cope to why we are not actually, designing the systems like this earlier. So the issue has never been about capability or commitment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing that sits with me still is what you mentioned earlier, Amirul, which was that quite often, without any intervention, the type of job descriptions which usually are made available for OKU Malaysians would be those in the entry level, filing, etc. Now, with the rise of course, AI, automation, and digitalisation, these are perhaps the sectors which are truly at risk. What would you say that your train-the-trainer hybrid model brings to the table, especially in this really crucial transition period whereby there will be so many job losses, but at the same time there's an opportunity for getting into different career paths so long as we also ensure OKU Malaysians have the relevant qualifications?
Right. The focus on digital literacy, the AI Nation 2030 and,
Yes.
future-facing industries reflects a clear understanding that economic participation today totally shaped by technology, not just physical infrastructure. That ambition is encouraging, but here's the uncomfortable truth. If inclusion is not designed into the transition, technology will scale exclusion faster than any previous economic shifts. So in practical terms, OKU talent is most risk in these three areas. Now, first, we talk about the AI-driven hiring systems. Many algorithms are trained
on biases, actually.
on biases, exactly.
Yeah.
So they're actually looking into gaps or non-linear careers as red flags. For OKU's individuals, those gaps often reflect as health realities, not capability, right? And if we don't fix that logic, we are simply automating discrimination. Now, secondly, we
Precisely.
look into the digital upskilling platforms. If training systems are not accessible by default, things like captions, screen reader capabilities, or flexible assessment, OKU talent gets locked out of the very programs meant to prepare Malaysians for the future. Thirdly, I would say that future industry job design, advanced manufacturing and automation still assume one type of body, one pace, and one workflow, right?
That's right.
If roles are not designed around outcomes and assistive tools, OKU talent never even reach even the starting line and playing on the same field, right? So if our model intercepts this risk by being very intentional, we align OKU training directly with future skill demand, but deliver it through accessible pathways and assess participants against the same standards as everyone else.
That's right, focusing on equity. Amirul, thank you so much for the conversation insofar. We take a short break, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with the rest of the conversation on Niaga Spotlight, focusing on employability for the disabled in Malaysia. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, and today's conversation with Amirul Safuan of Ameer Safone Inclusivity Academy, focusing on employability skills for OKU and disabled Malaysians. So, Amirul, let's talk a little bit more about the fact that it's more about employer mindset versus system design. And even when employers do say that they are very much open to having OKU Malaysians as part of their workforce, the uptake continues to remain low. What are some of the key areas that you feel persist and perpetuate stigma quite often, despite all the factors that we've just discussed, which tell us very strongly there is interest, there is talent, and even they have the type of training that is required.
Most employers today, Tehmina, are not actually hostile towards hiring OKU talent.
Right.
Right? Many are generally open. However, their recruitment process, assessment, job descriptions, and workplaces quite never designed for OKU realities in mind. So even with good intention, the system quietly filters OKU talents out without we realizing it. That's why we often hear employers say, we support inclusion, right?
We support diversity, yeah.
Correct, but the hiring numbers remain slow. It's not the resistance. It's actually what we call it as a structural friction. What we've consistently observed in this, once employers actually see OKU professionals perform against recognized standards, fear disappears very quickly. So the question shifts from can they cope to can they deliver, right? There's also a persistent myth around cost. Employers often assume inclusion is expensive. In reality, if we look globally, right, in many companies it has actually applied this, right? It's almost zero cost at all. The accommodation is simple. For example, flexible hours. And we also have this flexible working arrangement that we have talked about back in, I think, 2016, right?
Exactly. It'll be a decade, actually.
Right. And we have actually practiced it during the COVID-19, and why not? We actually apply it now, especially for the OKUs that, you know, I have experienced it, that I work from home, and even some of the OKUs that I've met working with the international organizations, they work from home. They do not need to be in the office, right? So the technologies today is fast moving, and we would be able to use that in order for them to still work regardless wherever they are, right? So the real cost here is not accommodation. The real cost is exclusion. You know, higher turnover, missed talent, and lost productivity. In practice, this barrier shows up in the constant areas. Firstly, about training system that are misaligned. You know, the training program sits outside the recognized national frameworks,
or even global standards, which are increasingly inclusive.
Yeah.
Another thing that stands out to me, Amirul, is the fact that you did mention we have a data desert when it comes to actual statistics for total numbers of OKUs, because not forgetting also that since society is ableist, structures are ableist, including access in public spaces, in private buildings, in corporate buildings, that also means those who fall into the category of being elderly or aged also technically are then restricted in their ability to access.
Right.
And as we also, as a country, we move towards an aging nation, we want to be inclusive of people returning to work post-retirement. So there's so much to consider and to benefit if employers start acting now, don't you think, when it comes to accessibility?
Yes, actually, the challenge is now is that we always take these challenges for granted, right? And all of designs that in buildings or in the systems that we have, when we talk about a person with disabilities, it's always an afterthought. I mean, we build things first, and then once we what do you call it? When this issue arises, then only going to patch
or modifications.
it. Right.
Yeah.
This is what we call as a universal design. So when it comes to universal designs, right, it needs to be started at the blueprint itself. You know, not once we have built something, then only we're going to fix it, right? So when you talk about data, for example, we need to understand better. To understand better that hopefully that Department of Statistics would have deeper data about persons with disabilities. We need to know how many of them has been employed, whether in the government sector or in the private sector. We also need to know how many of them actually has entered as an entrepreneurs, for example.
Exactly.
For example, those are registering businesses under the pendaftaran syarikat, for example. They have this free registration for the OKU. This is also a data that they can collect from there. And even for those with Perkeso should have the data of how many PWDs out there. So all we need to do is just to collect all this information, this
collate
data,
it and
collate
then
it,
use
yes.
it to actually inform our design, right?
Correct. And from there, I believe that the government would be able to plan their budget more strategically rather than looking into providing budget for charity-based, right? So they can also allocate the budget to focus more on developing and empowering PWDs to contribute back to the economy and also, build up the nation as an inclusive Malaysia.
Absolutely. Amirul, from there, moving into looking at how actually we can measure better impact beyond just participation numbers. So training programs, quite often, they do have big goals of how many participants are trained, but they perhaps lack the capacity or the vision to study outcomes. Tell us about how you are interested in actually studying the outcomes of what occurs after those who go through such training modules. It's really important when it comes to things like income mobility and even job retention, right? Because that also leads to economic security.
Right. What matters most is not how many people we train, but whether the economic reality actually change. Too many programs celebrate enrollment and completion because those numbers are easy to count, right? However, they don't tell us whether someone can now pay rent, support a family, or plan the future. So the metrics that matters most to us, grounded in real life. Firstly, about, like you mentioned, income mobility. Did the participants move from zero to or unstable income into something more predictable? Whether that's salaried employment, contract work, repeat training programs, engagement, or entrepreneurial revenue. That's the real test of whether skills translated into economic value. Secondly, job retention and repeat demand. One-off placements offer limited insights. Retention shows that the workplace design is functioning well, while repeat demand signals that the market genuinely values the talent. Thirdly, we talk about employer behavior. Are organizations coming back and asking for more OKU certified professionals? That's the point where inclusion moves from a pilot effort to sustainable practice.
That's
right?
how you get to those indicators, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. So like rounding out the conversation and easing in, Amirul, when we talk about scaling inclusion, it's important for projects like yours to actually have more of a nationwide approach. How would you envision that happening so that we can actually benefit across Malaysia from what Amirul Safuan Inclusivity Academy has learned just over the past couple of months?
All right. Today we have reached a point where successful inclusion programs need a clear pathway to scale and to further refine, rather than remain isolated pilots. The encouraging part is that scaling doesn't require reinventing the systems. It can be achieved through a few practical adjustments using tools that already exist across our skills and employment ecosystem. First, inclusion can be made measurably by auditable expanding the existing reporting. Second, procurement can be used incrementally as a lever. This doesn't require mandates or quotas. It can begin with preference, weighting, or pilot procurement categories, similarly to how SME and sustainability criteria that has been already applied. This integrates the OKU certified professionals and enterprises directly into the economic value chain in a controlled, low-risk way. Thirdly, training alone rarely change economic outcomes. What makes a difference is what comes next. Recognized certification, real working exposure, and access to professional networks. At the same time, it is important to scale responsibly. If quality assurance is weak, I believe employee confidence also drop. If roles are not redesigned around outcomes, retention suffers, and if accessibility is not embedded into digital and HR system early, barriers simply get replicated at scale. That's why national replication works best when inclusion sits inside the recognized skills economy.
Absolutely. Amirul, thank you so much for the enriching conversation. And we wish, of course, Amirul Safuan Inclusivity Academy all the best in not just scaling, but expanding the work as where it's needed.
Right.
Well, in closing, when we talk about inclusion, the real stress test isn't really about how good Malaysian policies sound on paper. It's important to also note that data from, for example, UNICEF Malaysia is showing that the rates of poverty amongst households headed by a disabled person are up to 17%. So it truly matters when it comes to accessibility and employability for the disabled, whether they are able to earn a living with dignity. Amirul Safuan's program reminds us that OKU talent requires systems to recognize it. As Malaysia pushes ahead with skills reform, inclusive employment and workplaces for disabled Malaysians must also be a part of this economic transformation. That's all we have time for today. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji, signing off for now.